So I'm going to introduce the panelists as we explore this question of what is the goal of parenting. And I should say that I'm going to mention everybody's kids on this panel because we're all parents, which means that we both do and do not know what we're talking about. With that caveat, Amy Chua is a law professor at Harvard, and
Yale.
you probably...
Yale.
Oh, Yale, sorry. Oh, sorry. I've got Harvard right there. I'm going to just mix those two up. Amy is a law professor at Yale, and she's probably, even though she's written 2 other best-selling books, she's probably best known for her Tiger Mom book that we will be discussing shortly. Erika Christakis, I'm going to read now because I don't want to mix up schools, is an early childhood educator, former teacher, education consultant, and current college administrator at Harvard University, where she lives and works among 400, and as she put it, high-maintenance Harvard undergraduates. She writes about issues affecting young people, and she is a weekly columnist for Time.com. She has 3 children, ages 19, 16, and 14. And those of you who have read Tiger Mom know that Amy has 2 children, 19 and 16. Larry Cohen is a psychologist in Boston. He is also the author of Playful Parenting. He has a private therapy practice, and he is a speaker and consultant to public and independent schools. He's also the author of The Art of Rough Housing, and Best Friends, Worst Enemies, Friendship, Popularity, and Social Cruelty in the Lives of Boys and Girls, and Mom, They're Teasing Me. He has a daughter, Emma, and a son, Jake. Jake is 19 and Emma is 21. Yep. And Ellen Galinsky is the president and co-founder of Families and Work Institute, and has served as the president of the National Association for the Education of Young Children, which is the largest group of early childhood educators. Her more than 45 books and reports include most recently the book Mind in the Making, The 7 Essential Life Skills Every Child Needs. She and her husband are the parents of 2 grown children, Philip and Laura, who are probably in the, or Norman, I guess, is here, and Laura are right there. Okay, now I will try to keep everything straight as we get started. So before this morning, I asked all of the panelists what they thought the goal of parenting was. And they all gave me these very thoughtful, articulate responses that sounded like what they should want is helping children have focus and self-control, learn to take the perspectives of others, make connections, learn to take on challenges. I could go on and on. Larry said childhood is its own thing, not preparation for adulthood or our vision of adulthood. Everybody had these very smart responses. But then when I asked, well, what did they want for their own kids? They all basically said, I just want them to be happy. And so the question is, I don't think that that's changed. I think, for a very long time, parents have wanted their kids to be happy. So the goal hasn't changed, but the meaning of that goal has changed. What does happiness mean for our kids nowadays? And I want to start off by asking about the level of anxiety that parents seem to have around making sure that their kids are going to be happy. And I want to start with Larry, who started off by telling me, you can't be average and happy nowadays.
Right. I mean, I think that people, especially maybe this crowd a little more so, feel that average is a dirty word. And that's just a terrifying thing, that your child might be average. And parents have a lot of anxiety about how children are going to turn out. Some of it is about right now. I can't stand this, what's happening right now. And a lot of it, like most anxiety, is geared towards the future. A story from my own life, my father said to me when I was a teenager, I'm not going to control you and tell you what to do. You can be any kind of medical doctor that you want. Or as we call it in my family, a real doctor. So I showed him, and I rebelled and became a psychologist instead of a real doctor.
So, Erika, you had said that there's this assumption in our parenting that we would make our kids' lives better that was always the assumption, and that a lot of this anxiety comes from the fact that it's really hard nowadays to make our kids' lives better than our own lives. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think that's right. And I think you have to sort of go back in time a little bit and look at what the goal of parenting was, for centuries, millennia even, which was to keep our kids alive so that they could reproduce. And then we sort of got a little bit higher up in the hierarchy of needs and looked at, children who could provide for us in our old age. And now we're in this era where we want kids to be happy, but secretly we also really want them to be successful. And we think that these things are in opposition. I'd like to argue that they're not. But I also think the economy plays a role in our struggle with letting our kids be happy. But I also think there are issues unrelated to economics. We live in the information age, and that causes huge stress for families, certainly in our family, because now we're aware of what crummy parents we are. And in our parents' generation, they were in blissful ignorance. We were crawling around in the backseat of the station wagon, and anyone who's seen Mad Men knows that. But now we have a lot of anxiety from the data, the information that's out there. I also think we live in what we call the epidemiological age, where we have a lot of information about what is healthy and unhealthy. So all of these things create a lot of tension in that struggle about happiness.
Can you talk a little bit about the terminology in the New England Journal of Medicine?
Right. Yes, the accident.
Yeah,
this is really interesting. It's actually in the British Medical Journal. I was a public health person before I became an early childhood educator, so I always look at sort of the health lens with families. And the British Medical Journal, which is one of the leading medical journals in the world, not too long ago literally outlawed the word accident in their reporting, because they argue that there really are almost no accidents. And if you look at the antecedents for almost all bad things that happen to us in life, including famines and droughts, but including things like children getting hit by cars, suicide, that these really are preventable injuries. And I think this is a huge shift in how we view childhood. Because if we're starting to think that everything we do, all these bad things are preventable, then every time you decide not to put a helmet on your child when they're riding a scooter on a sidewalk, you start feeling like a neglectful person. And so again, it's sort of that crisis of information. I'm not suggesting remotely that we go back in time when children were really less safe physically. But it does create a lot of anxiety, I think, to live in a world where we feel so responsible as parents. I don't know how you all feel, but I just feel racked with responsibility, even though many studies show we have a lot less influence on our kids than we think.
And Ellen, you as a teacher were saying that you've noticed that there's this propensity to criticize parents.
Well, I'd actually like to step back for a moment and say that about 3 decades ago, I actually wrote a book on how parents grow and change. And I interviewed parents, it's called The 6 Stages of Parenthood, and I interviewed parents at different aspects, at different times in parenthood. And I found that process of deciding what kind of parent we want to be is actually a developmental process that starts when we're expectant parents, whether it's by adoption or by birth. We start to think about what our own parents did that we liked and didn't like, and how we're going to do it differently. And then we think, oh my God, I shouldn't be a parent, I'm not ready, or I'll be the most wonderful parent in the world, all these sort of fantasies that we have. And then as our children are born and they're not exactly who we expected them to be, and the world isn't exactly as we expected it to be, we change. But you're right, when I was a teacher, I used to sit around in the teacher's room. This was my first job right out of college. I used to sit around in the teacher's room and listen to the way people talked about parents. And if you substituted a person of color or woman for those sentences, you would be called racist or sexist. I think of it as parentist. We have such a propensity, and we haven't gotten over that. I mean, we haven't stopped criticizing parents. I hear it all the time, everywhere. We're so culturally prone to beat up parents. I would like us to pay more attention to not being parentists, the way we've learned at least socially not to be quite so racist and sexist.
Right. So Amy, you're used to a little parental criticism.
Yeah, I noticed you're looking at me like...
Why do you think it is that that, I know that you're speaking as somebody who wrote a memoir, and not as you like to make clear, not as a parenting expert. But why do you think it is that, given the way that we're so anxious about parenting and we all want to do it right, what do you think accounted for the response to your book and the way that you raised your kids?
It's funny. I think that, in a way, parental anxiety and the obsession with happiness and is in some ways a luxury. So when I was the daughter of immigrants, two people who came to this country with absolutely nothing, and when the way they parented, they didn't have time to worry about happiness and parenting guides and classes. It was just, parenting for them was about survival. As you know, it was about, teaching your kids to take advantage of every opportunity, because they knew how hard opportunity was to come by. It was education. And I just got back from a couple weeks in China, and I see that now that there's more wealth there, actually, they now have time to be anxious. Happiness, they're for the first time interested in this question of happiness. So, and I do think that the part of the response to my book is, what I'd like to say is, I think my book accidentally tapped into two of America's deepest anxieties, fear of parenting and fear of China. I just hit that perfect intersection, just exploded.
So, Lyra, you were talking about this sort of this cognitive bias, the taboo trade-off. Can you, which I think relates to a little bit about what Amy was saying.
Yeah, I think that what I hear from parents is that play and connection and getting on the floor and doing fun things instead of flashcards, that's all great, unless it interferes with learning and success. And that parents have this fear that you have to give up one and give up or the other. So the taboo trade-off is, the classic example is the salesman at Toys R Us selling you a car seat and saying, well, this is the best one, it's the safest. Well, you could pay less and get a less safe one. And there's a taboo against putting a price on the safety of your child. And I think we have the same taboo on, can we aim for anything less than the absolute pinnacle of success? And if we don't, then we're shortchanging our children. And it always makes me think of this quote, or a story from A.S. Neal, who founded the Summerhill School in the 1950s, and it was a radical, progressive school. You didn't have to go to class if you didn't want to, and parents were very skeptical, and they would say, well, how are they going to get to medical school? And he would say, well, would you rather your child be a happy truck driver, or it was England, so a happy lorry driver, or an unhappy surgeon? And the parents would think, and they'd say, is that possible to be a happy truck driver? And is that possible to be an unhappy surgeon? And we all know that, of course, it's possible to be happy, no matter what your profession is, what your job is. And we know that it's possible to be absolutely miserable when you're at the top of the most respected field in the world. And so there's much more to that happiness than that.
Right. Amy and I were talking yesterday about this idea of the play, what you were talking about, and this, it's very trendy in certain private schools to go back to this very kind of loose, non-academic structure. And yet what's really happening is that the kids are doing that, and then they're coming home and they have kind of Amy at home because their parents are then drilling multiplication tables with them, or doing some kind of supplemental academic exercise with them. And so the kids who are not getting the tutors or who are not getting that academic exercise at home are the ones who are just getting the play-based part, because it's what Larry said, you can get the car seat, you can get the play-based school, right. But you're at risk of maybe them not going to Harvard.
Well,
yeah. I'm sorry. I was going to talk to Ellen a little bit about play-based, but go ahead, Erika, and then we'll go over to Ellen.
Well, my career has spanned pre-K through college, and so at Harvard, I actually see the kids who have played and the ones who haven't played. So I just want to make a pitch that I don't think these goals are in opposition. And I worry a lot that we forget as parents that the most important way children learn, and I'm talking about young children, is through play. And we have decades and decades of research to back this up, from neuroscience, from psychology, from education research. And so I just want to be sure that we're not creating kind of a false dichotomy, And I can tell you when we see students at Harvard, we see a lot of people who have checked all the boxes, they've done all the worksheets, and then they get to college and they're really adrift because they don't have some of the social and emotional skills that are going to get them into the 21st century as functional people. And I don't just mean people with good jobs, I mean people with good relationships. So I just want to make sure that we bear in mind that play, speaking as an early childhood educator, I really don't think the assumption that play is an extra or supplemental is an accurate one. I think sometimes play gets misunderstood, or sometimes it's not implemented effectively for children.
Well, I think a lot of people talk about cultivating play, and that concerns me because I think that's another thing that parents are going to try to then micromanage. So that we have to cultivate
Yes.
how they
Exactly.
play and
Yes.
what they're going to do, and if it's educational enough in terms of the kind of play that they're doing, as opposed to just organic, let kids run around and do their thing. Ellen, you have a lot of expertise in this area.
Well, I think that we're talking about the two issues in America that your book hit. I think that we have this tendency to think either or all of the time. It's play or learning. It's cognitive or social emotional. What I did, because I was concerned that we not only have a dropout of school, dropout of college phenomena in America, but we also have a dropout of learning phenomena that far too kids are engaged in learning. There are studies that the University of Indiana did. Howard Gardner's in the audience, and he was the one who told me about the study of high school engagement. Studies that I did where I found that too many kids were seeing learning as only instrumental, that you learn so that you could get a job, go to the next school, and support yourself, and all that's good. It's again part of the either or that we shouldn't fall into, but we've lost that intrinsic survival skill of learning. And in a world where knowledge is changing so rapidly, it's really critical that we have it. So what I did was spend now 11 years going out and filming some of the best research on how to keep children as self-directed, engaged in learning. And often, let's take the issue of self-control, which is one of the life skills that I found were really very important in kids being able to thrive. I don't use the word succeed, the word thrive, socially, emotionally, and intellectually. And how do kids learn self-control? They don't learn it by being chained to their desks. Mm-hmm. They learn it by being physically active. They learn it by playing games, red light, green light. Simon Says, simple game, played it for over the centuries. That teaches executive function skills. If you look at Simon Says, you have to pay attention. You have to, these are all characteristics of executive functions. You have to remember the rules, and you can't go on automatic. And executive function skills are always goal-directed. That's used as a test of school readiness and school success, which shows a couple of months differentiation in kids, all kinds of different literacy, math, et cetera.
Right.
So I think it's really important. Play is very important in learning.
It is. And one of the things that, we've been talking about is differentiating between, our goals are, we want to raise a happy kid. What does that mean? Does it mean that they have checked off all the boxes? Or does it mean that, that they have those life skills that you're talking about? And I want to show a video, we're going to show a quick 2-minute video right now of something that came from Ellen's work. It's actually Carol Dweck's work that Ellen can talk about, but it has to do with the way that we tell our kids, oh, you're so smart, versus, and what that will do for them in life versus telling them, like when they go down the slide and we're like, good job, and they've done it every day. We're going, good job, or they tie their shoes, and the first time, yeah, you say, great. But every morning when they get ready for school, good job, you tied your shoes. And so Ellen can kind of cue up this video.
Well, actually, because I'm not sure that I'll get it in later, I want to say something about happiness. I don't think my goal for my children was ever that they be happy. Yes, I want you to be miserable, darling. Be really sad, be miserable. No, what I think of happiness is a byproduct of being involved, being interested, caring about something beyond yourself. And so I personally, if we're going to speak as a parent, I never really wanted my kids That wouldn't have been my goal at all. It would be more like how you learn to take on tough things, because I think life brings tough things, and how you succeed in that. And Amy, I think that's so much about what you write about in Tiger Mom. So this is around the skill of taking on challenges. And what I've done is spend now 11 years filming the very best research across disciplines in how to keep that fire in children's eyes burning brightly. And sometimes it's counterintuitive. And Carol Dweck found that the good job or the you're so smart actually creates a lack of self-esteem.
Lack of motivation, yeah.
So let's take a look at the video.
We took 5th graders. We give them puzzles to solve.
So you see these blocks? Can you tell me what color is on that side?
Red, yellow, white, blue.
All right, so what I want you to do is put these blocks together so that the picture on top matches the picture here, all right?
First, we give children a set of easier puzzles to do.
Now here's the next one.
When these 9 and 10-year-olds successfully put together the puzzle, the children are praised for either their intelligence
Wow, you did really well. You must be really smart at these.
or the effort there.
Wow, you did really well. You must have tried really hard at these.
Then we give them a much harder set of problems, ones that they might, in fact, struggle with.
Here's the next one.
And we see what happens. What happens to their confidence? Do they think, oh, this means I'm not good at it after all? Do they stop liking the puzzles?
Did I do something wrong here?
Or do they maintain their confidence and think, well, it just needs more effort or strategies? What happens to their motivation?
Are you ready to go on?
Ta-da! We also ask them, well, which problems do you want to work on some more? Those easier ones or those harder ones? And generally we find that kids who have been praised for their intelligence really want to go back to those easier ones that were their claim to fame.
This is a sign of a fixed mindset, the belief that intelligence is innate and can't be changed.
What we found was that children thought that difficulty meant they weren't smart or they weren't good at the task.
So you seem to have more trouble with this one, and I want to know why you think that was.
Probably because I'm not good at these problems.
A very discouraging conclusion.
Other children show a growth mindset.
The growth mindset is like this. No matter who you are, you can always become a great deal smarter. They feel smart when they're working really hard on something difficult and making progress.
So if I give you some more problems, would you like more problems like these that are pretty easy so you'll do well, or problems like these that'll be hard but you might learn a lot from them?
These.
More like these?
Students praised for effort generally want those hard ones that they can learn from.
So can I try to make it again?
Yes, sure.
The students who were interested in learning and getting smarter thought of their abilities as something that they could develop.
You can change what level of intelligence you're on. It's not only you're really dumb or you're really smart.
Yeah. How would you get smarter, do you think?
You would take challenges.
Yeah.
Not just say, okay, I've finished basic stuff. I'm done.
So, related to that, Amy, in your book, there's that scene where you have the famous scene from Keeping Lulu at the Piano. And I think that's been very misunderstood by people because here in the video we're talking about not saying, oh, you're great and don't try harder, and, or they're afraid to take on other tasks because then their self-conception of being smart gets shattered. So tell us a little bit about your thought process with the piano scene.
Okay, this is a little story called The Little White Donkey that I got in huge trouble for because it was reproduced in the Wall Street Journal. But in our family, it's actually one of our favorite stories. But again, I'm not the expert. Like, I'm not saying everybody should do this. But when Lulu, my younger daughter, she's the one who rebelled and is the reason I wrote the book. But when she was younger, she was playing a little piece by Jacques Ibert called The Little White Donkey, which is a very cute piece, but it's very hard for young kids because the two hands play completely different rhythms, and it was hard to do. And we were having one of our, she and I just have locked horns in the beginning, but we were having a big argument. She's like, can't do this, I won't do this. And I said, get back to the piano. And at one point, my husband called me aside, and he said, Amy, privately, he said, has it ever occurred to you that maybe Lulu just can't do this? That she just doesn't have the coordination yet, that she's too young? And I said, oh, you just don't believe in her. Well, I don't care. You can be the parent they adore because you take them to baseball games and make them pancakes and water slides and all this. But I know she could do this. I'm going to go back. And I went back and we fought. And the controversy, it sort of got so taken out of context because it's like, Amy Chua would not let her daughter go to the bathroom or eat food. And it was Guantanamo Bay. And it was anybody who's had a kid, you're practicing piano. It's like after 5 minutes, Mommy, I need to go to the bathroom. After 10 minutes, I'm thirsty. After 5 minutes, I have a headache. And so after the 10th time she'd been to the bathroom, I was like, I don't think you need to go to the bathroom anymore. We are sitting here. But anyway, the end of the story is we went at it. And at a certain point, I thought, okay, God, my husband's right. She can't do it. And at that exact moment, her two hands came together. And then, interestingly, this kind of pride and joy set in. And I don't know how this relates to happiness or self-esteem, but she would not leave the piano. She just wanted to play it over and over and over. She couldn't believe that she could do it. So what I said in the book is, the reason I bring it up is my younger daughter Lulu has said a lot of mean things about me. She just texted one like 10 minutes ago. It's like so it's not. But one nice thing that she has said is she tells me, even just recently, she said, Mommy, I remember that exact moment, that little white donkey moment, because when I'm sitting in a chemistry test in school and I feel a blank, I can't do this, I don't know this, I will remember that moment, that, there was once a moment when I felt, I can't do this, I know I can't, but just through hard work, just kind of keeping at it, I actually discovered I could. So I do think that, the best way for building confidence is actually not having somebody tell you over and over, but knowing in your heart that actually you once thought you couldn't do something, and by sticking with it, you learned that you could.
Right. And so, in your family, you weren't telling your kids all the time, unless they earned it, you're special, you're special, you're special. And there was this commencement speech recently that many of you might know about, where the theme of the speech was telling the high school graduates, you're not that special. And a lot of people took issue with it. And I think, what he was trying to say was that out in the world, there are this many valedictorians, there are this many, in the scheme of life, you're not more special than everybody else, and that actually serves you well. And yet, it's really hard, I think, given that we want our kids to develop the character issues, the character traits, and things like resilience, humility, all of those things, and we feel like we're damaging their self-esteem if we're not constantly telling them how special they are, when in fact we're actually preventing them from forming a solid sense of self-esteem. And Larry, can you speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, I had two things to say about that. One is I had a supervisor for being a therapist that he was the son of a preacher, and he said he learned from his father that the job of a preacher and a therapist is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I think that that's part of parenting also. And I think that there's a way with children who things come easy to them, like in the film, it's like, oh yeah, I was really good at that, and I want to just stick with that. And we have to push those kids. And the ones, and you're not so special, commencement speech, these are kids who have been told they're special all the time. The path has been cleared for them in a lot of ways, and they have this advantage, and I think they need to be discomforted a little bit. Mm-hmm. But then there are children who need to be comforted. And the other thing I want to say about Amy's Little White Donkey story is that when I see the adults in my practice who are the kind of the casualties of the extremes of the achieve, I don't care what you think, I don't care what you want. And I compare that to Amy's stories. The difference is whether the child is seen, felt, heard, with the kind of the saving grace. The reason reading the book that I didn't have that, oh my God, we're gonna lynch Amy Chua, is that that her daughters were able to say, I hate this, I hate you, I'm mad. And I think that as parents, we need to listen to that. Our children do get mad at us. And that adults in therapy, they always say that their feelings were not welcome. They were not reflected. They weren't allowed to get angry. They weren't allowed to be sad. They weren't allowed to be scared. And that we have to welcome all of our children's feelings, and that's part of that comforting them. And at that point, it makes a big difference whether the child is being seen and heard. And when she tells you later, now I know I can do it, that what she's saying is, you were really seeing me in that moment, not what sometimes happens, which is I had to practice the piano so much, and what I really wanted to be doing was X, Y, or Z, and they didn't know me. My parents did not know me, and that's a very painful thing.
Right, and when you were just mentioning, the path has been paved for so many of these kids,
Right.
Part of that is they don't want to hear the I hate you. It's actually really healthy for your kid to think that they were born into the wrong family and that, maybe some switched at birth thing happened at the hospital. You want them to, at some point, hate you, not for a prolonged period of time, but you want them to develop their own separation and individuation.
Well, I call it something to bump up against, and I talk a lot with parents who are on the attachment parenting side, never let them have to walk or cry or be alone or any of that, and there's a lot in that. It builds connection. It gives a sense of security, but what they often miss is something to bump up against.
Right.
And I often hear from them when the kids are 4, and it's like, it was like they need to have a fight.
Right, exactly. And so a lot of these kids who, because we don't want to upset them, we don't, there are a lot of parents who won't have their kids do chores at home, which is just a basic family responsibility, but they're so busy with their homework and they're sleep deprived, and how can we do this? They're in the middle of this drawing and we can't interrupt their creativity to come set the table. Things like that. We don't like that our kids will get mad at us. And so they grow up and they don't have sort of basic life skills. And Erika, I think you see this firsthand.
I do see this firsthand, and I'm conflicted because, as a parent and as an early educator, I see the value of letting your child be creative and not putting such rigid limits on them and expectations. But at the same time, it becomes so dysfunctional. To be blunt. I mean, it does, in my own family. And when I was a preschool teacher, not terribly long ago, we would have to put on a circus to get these little 4-year-olds to clean up. In the old days, they had a sort of intrinsic motivation to want to participate in a group activity that was helpful to everyone. So we are raising kids who have trouble doing these things. We see at Harvard, I assume this is what you're asking me about, some really crazy stories. And maybe I could share a couple of them.
That'd be great.
I have an email that was sent to a professor, and I will edit it for privacy and length. But this gives you an example. Now, this is not typical. I mean, these are the outliers, but it's always fun to talk about the outliers. So here we go. Hi, Prof. That's a formal salutation, just in case you're wondering. I attended lecture yesterday and found out that we have an exam due in the course last week. I'm sorry, that we had an exam due. Until the lecturer mentioned it yesterday, I was oblivious to the fact that we had one for this course. My attempts to notify you of this yesterday didn't pan out. Upon my subsequent reinspection of the syllabus, I also noticed that there were 2 reading assignments due before the midterm. Those 2 I didn't know were due at any particular time. Let me interrupt. This is Harvard. I'm completely astonished about these revelations. And I'm not sure how this happened. I'm also surprised that you didn't notify me of my failure to complete these assignments. What do you suggest we do?
So this is the kind of thing, and we'll come back, but this is the kind of thing
You know, and to me, this is a failure. Now, I'm not prepared to say that it's a failure of parenting. I think it's, as you said, Ellen, there's a lot of parentism, and there are huge societal forces working on our kids. My daughter was sort of mouthing off at me one day, and we prided ourselves on not letting our kids watch TV, which was a very pretentious and unrealistic goal, but we stuck to it for a while. And you know, she came home sort of parroting this rude talk, and I realized she got it from a TV show. And you know, that's the sarcasm and the sort of bantering. And so there are a lot of societal forces, but it is a failure.
Right, and when you have that where the kids have never, you know, when probably this kid, you know, guessing, didn't get into the school play, and mom and dad called up and said, how could this, you know, my child not get into the school play, or my child got a bad grade and let me go talk to the teacher, or you know, whatever it was, my child didn't get invited to a birthday party and I better go fix that situation with the other parents.
We had, I mean, this is hilarious. We had a student, my husband and I work as housemasters, and our predecessor was actually a Nobel laureate, and he was called by a parent and asked to check the child's room to make sure that he was cleaning his room and making his bed. And this 65-year-old eminent Nobel laureate said, if he hasn't learned yet, it's too late.
But I think that it's interesting when we look at Amy, you know, we talk about helicopter parenting, and Amy in some ways might be looked at as a helicopter parent in the way she handled you know, the piano by really, you know, driving to all the lessons and doing all those things. But she also really made her kids take responsibility for, you know, their actions and what they did in their lives. And you were saying that as they got older, you know, in high school and college, what Erika's dealing with, that the kids were really, you know, acting very young for their age, and yet you were very hands-off at that point.
Yeah, I myself kind of see, I mean, these terms are kind of arbitrary, but I kind of see tiger parenting, as it was practiced on me, as the opposite of helicopter parenting, actually. I mean, it's about instilling kind of this inner strength. I mean, when it works well. Larry, I could not agree with you more. I got so many emails from people who said, look, I was raised exactly like the way you're saying, and it was horrible. My parents didn't love me. It was like, get the A or you don't love me. And it depends what message is conveyed.
But did it depend also on the relationship with your parents, apart from their child rearing?
Yeah, I think so. But, you know, like the message I always got from my parents was, whatever the words were, you know, the message I got was, I believe in you. You know, and I was the apple of my dad's eye. But if I told some of the people what some of the things my father said to me, I think you'd be horrified, because it's hard to read, you know. But anyway, for me, this tiger parenting is about instilling a sense of focus and self-discipline and kind of inner strength and resilience in kids at a very young age. So when, it is true, I think, that when my kids went to high school, they were able to focus in a way. Maybe it was the music, but I would never have written a paper for my daughters. And you know, at Harvard now, you know, Sophia writes back and says her friends will email back papers for their parents to edit, right? And Sophia is completely on her own. I mean, that's one thing I am very proud of. My girls are very self-reliant, and I think it is, so in that sense, I do think it's the opposite. I think of helicopter parenting as hovering, and parents who do everything for their kids and won't carry, you know, don't want them to carry their own sports bags and protect them. Whereas I do see tiger parenting as kind of almost the opposite in some ways.
Right, and yet there's this incredible pressure, I think, partly because of social media and partly because it's not only keeping up with the Joneses now, but it's keeping up with the Joneses kids, where if they're taking the $6,000 Princeton review class, then you feel like, and your child is the only child in your neighborhood who's not, and this is a very, you know, elite neighborhood that we're talking about, then you feel like maybe you're doing your child a disservice.
Well, and there's this fears about how little room there is at the top. And you know, when I read your book, Amy, I was thinking about the history of feudalism and you know, this, like, you know, feudalism sucks. You know, it's like there's a tiny room at the top and no middle and a horrible bottom. And you know, when you look around now, and you know, capitalism sucks. You know, it's like it's really looking the same way. I trademarked that term, so you can't use that. But there's very little room at the top, and there's this idea like we got to get that Ivy League education, or it's going to be the gutter. And I took a year off from graduate school, and my father felt like Skid Row was the next step. From a year off and running.
Can I respond?
Yeah.
I think that, again, there is a difference between kind of throwing your kids out and like be independent and do it yourself versus fixing everything for them. And to me, the middle ground is helping them learn to solve the problems. If you know, some of you know the famous marshmallow test. I do have it on video, but we're not going to show it. But it looks at the kids who could wait for the marshmallow. They could then have 2. And what Walter Mischel is now doing, because he found that the kids who could wait for the 2 marshmallows were the more likely to thrive as they were older, he is teaching children strategies to wait for the marshmallows. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important. If you look at the research again and again and again across all these disciplines, the kids who do best have the families who help them figure out how to deal with not turning their paper in on time, not mommy's gonna call or daddy's gonna call and fix it. I think that's important. Also, I think in stretching your kids, you can't stretch them beyond what they can do. You know, your husband's in your conversation about are her hands coordinated well enough? And maybe they were, in this case they were. But it's kind of that zone right beyond what they can do. And then I think one final thing is, in the way that you're talking about success is externally defined. You are the CEO, you're the doctor, the medical kind, the real kind, whatever it is. And I think that if I look around both at the research and at the people in my lives, the people who do the best have a passion. And so, I mean, if there were any advice that I'd give to parents about raising children who have all of these life skills, it's to help them find and build on their passion.
But let's be clear, too, about what that means, because I think that parents panic, and we'll talk about Larry in a second, we'll speak to that, but I think that parents think that that passion has to be something that is, again, an indicator of external success or achievement. And that passion can be cooking, that passion can be surfing, that passion can be a hobby, that passion can be being a parent, it could be anything. It's about engagement with the world and having meaning in life for you. And people are so worried that their kids don't have passions, that they're trying to figure out when they're 2 and 3 and 4, what activities they should, should they go to math camp? Should they, what should they be doing? And Larry has some stories about this.
Yeah, well, I got a panic call from a mother who said, I'm really worried about my child, I'm really worried about my child. I was like, what's the situation? It's like, well, she's 4 and she hasn't found her passion yet. And she was signed up for 12 activities and so, yes, we want children to be inner-directed, but this is just more, it's like parents it's that anxiety and it can latch onto anything. And so it's like, yes, you need a passion and they can latch onto that. In the same way that I think parents learn that children learn through play. And so then they thought every play moment has to be educational. So you go to the playground and it's like, how many wheels does that truck have? What color is that truck? And the poor child can't play with the truck.
And then they have these playgrounds where they put out, they're called, what are they called? The Imaginarium, right. So the kids went to the playgrounds, and at first they didn't quite know what to do because it was so unstructured. And, there are these big foam blocks and these big foam pieces that are just fun for kids, but they're so used to having these activities that are very concrete, and that actually holds them back in terms of figuring out what their passions are going to be and figuring out who they are and what they're interested in.
Could I add on to that? Mm-hmm. I think if I had any piece of advice, it would be to just listen to children's developmental needs. Because we know, and again, we have decades of research, that kids need to slow down. And that's how they find engagement with other human beings and with their own internal motivation and their own interests. And we live in a very fast world. All you have to do is look at a movie from the 1970s and you're falling asleep. And you realize that the pace of everything has just moved so quickly. And so I think that children need to be given a break. They really need to be allowed to just be little kids and to slow down and look at the ground. I saw a wonderful study once where young kids were given cameras and they photographed the ceilings and the ground, because they're small and those are the things that interest them. We need to let them look at the ants.
Actually, I did a study, the first nationally representative study that asked them about this was about how they felt about their parents and particularly their employed mothers and fathers. And we debate quality time versus quantity time. When I asked the kids how they saw it, they wanted focus time, which means I don't want you always there for me, but when I need you to be there for me, I want you to be there for me.
Not on the computer. Right?
Yeah. I just like Earth to Mom, Earth to Dad. Could you come in, please? But they also wanted hang-around time. They felt that their lives, and this was a nationally representative. This is not just, upper middle class kids. This was a group of kids from all over the country. They wanted some hang-around time where maybe they stay in their pajamas on Saturday morning and make biscuits or go for a walk and look at the ants.
Instead of rushing off.
And I think we know that helps to cultivate imagination, which is something that there's been research on, that there's a decline in empathy and so on, and perspective taking, which Ellen, you've written so much about. It's hard to do that when you're just always on the go. You need some time to reflect.
When my son was in preschool, he was in the car seat in the back, and he said to me at one point, he interrupted me and said, "Mommy, can you just be quiet for a minute because I need time to daydream?" And that was a big wake-up call for me.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, no, I remember as a new dad, I was like, we're going to have a lot of eye contact, And then I had a friend who was a child psychologist who's like, like 30% of the time when you're alert, with the baby's alert and you're with them, you want to have that, and I've tried to not like have a clock of like 30% of the time. But
Edtronic, I know who you're talking about.
Right, so you kind of, but the children, they don't want that intense every second.
Right, and Amy actually talks about how there was a lot of hanging out that's not in her book, and that one of the things that struck me about how Amy handled the criticism to her book, and Larry mentioned this as well, is that she didn't say, well, this worked for our family because my daughter played at Carnegie Hall. She said this worked for our family because we have a really close family. And I think that we forget when we talk about the goals of parenting, where does that fit in? Where does this hanging around with the family instead of we got to rush off to this person has a play date and this person has a birthday party and this person has 3 activities this weekend? But what about just hanging out, and how does that help our kids? Who would like to? Well,
I just want to say that an idea for defining the success and the goal is something we don't usually think about, which is, what kind of a wife or husband do we want our children to be? What kind of a mother and father do we want them to be? What kind of a grandparent do we want them to be? We don't usually imagine that. We're imagining success as career and money and all that.
In some ways, we almost need to go back to the lower levels of the hierarchy of our needs, because I think in previous generations, that was a critical question. The goal of parenting was to make sure your child married well and stayed married, and
right.
And we've sort of lost touch with some of those relational goals, I think, of parenting.
Right. So in terms of things, the skills, the friendship skills, the relational skills, as parents, when we talk about the goals of parenting, where does that fit in with the sort of trends that are happening in parenting today?
I think that the key is relaxed high expectations. And some people forget the high expectations, and that's the email there. And some people forget to relax. And we really need both, and that's where the balance comes from.
And Larry, how do we do that? Can you explain that exercise that you were talking about with?
Well, yeah, I think that I define happiness and joy as living in line with your deepest values. And you're not going to be happy all the time. When you're living in line with your values, you're going to do hard stuff. You do hard stuff as a parent. You're going to say, no, you need to do your homework, or you need to practice, or things that are unpopular, or we're not going to have ice cream for dinner. You're living in line with your values. But parents don't have time to reflect on what those values are. And so there's an exercise that I love, and I do it with people in my office a lot, which is, I do it with kids too, which is write down on cards 8 or 10 things that you value. Happiness, love, family, it could be anything. And then the exercise is, okay, now go through them and now give away one. And that was pretty easy. And then, okay, now give away another one. And then and then you keep going. And it gets harder and harder, and people get really kind of agitated as if I'm actually asking them to let go of it. But you end up with the 1 or 2 that are the transcendent values, and then, okay, what does it mean to live in line with that? Because as parents, we're putting out fires all the time, and we're tired all the time, and we don't take that time to reflect.
You know, interestingly enough, a lot of corporate training of executives does exactly the same thing, because they think that, they've found that business executives who are the most successful are authentic and are clear about their values and more intentional about their values. So it's an interesting business exercise, not just parenting.
So I think we're about ready to take questions. But we want to show one final 2-minute video. Ellen, you want to introduce it?
Well, this is a study that I was just talking about, and in the study, it was a nationally representative study of 3rd through 12th graders. And the first time anyone had asked the children, and I so believe in your kids' ability to text you and so forth. I mean, my kids, I think the thing that I learned the most from my mother was that I could say anything to her as long as I said it not meanly. I couldn't be rude, I couldn't be nasty, but I could tell her exactly what I thought. And I thought, you know, my mother died at almost 100. I thought that was probably the best gift that my mother ever gave me. And our kids have done, there's Laura, but they've done the same thing. I mean, they're very free to tell me. I get lessons from her every single day about you should do this and you should do that, but politely. So this was the first study that had ever asked children, and one of the questions that I asked children was, if you had one wish, this is for parents who had employed parents, if you had one wish to change the way your mother's or your father's work affects your life, what would that wish be? And I asked another nationally representative group of parents to guess what their kids would wish, and they all thought their kids would wish for more time. But that wasn't the top wish for children. The top wish for children, which only 2% of the parents guessed, was that their parents be less tired and stressed. Yeah, so it was kind of like holding up a mirror. And this study included children whose mothers were employed and mothers who weren't. So the final question in the study, and then I've replicated it on video, was what messages do you want to give the parents of America? So here are the messages to us from children.
My message is to, like, if you're stressed out and you're tired, like, take a little nap, but don't take a long one.
Be nice to their kids.
Try to find a good babysitter by asking your kid if you like this babysitter.
The thing that you can do the most is just be a good role model.
Try to spend some time with your kids, but also do some work.
Your hard work is worth it.
I would say to work hard and do the best they can, but also be with their children.
To hang out with the kid, even if it's like 5 minutes, to talk with them about how their day was or if they had a hard time in school.
Spend time with each other, because in life, when you don't, you're gonna regret it if you didn't do it.
You know, take advantage of the time that you have, because you never know what you've got till it's gone.
To get an idea of what is your child thinking about you, of what you're doing, how does he feel? Because a parent and a daughter or son, it takes a lot of communication, and there's a relationship, just like a husband and a wife. Parents should ask the children to find out what the children think about what the parents are doing with their lives, because their work and their other habits are affecting the children.
So on that note, we're going to open it up for questions, and we have a microphone coming around.
Hi. Wondering if there has been any research or data as to whether there should be differences in teaching girls versus boys, giving their maturity levels, their attention spans. Some of us heard this morning that 60% of women are attending college versus 40% of men. And should there be something done to, make that more equal or not? And also, I would love to know what was the response of the Harvard professor to that email, because that must have been very educational to that student.
Well, I think the boy-girl question, there was a wonderful panel yesterday talking about those issues. I don't know if anybody here wants to.
I was there.
Okay.
Well, you were there too, weren't
you?
Go
ahead.
Yeah, we were all.
Or we can share the question. Well, one of the take-homes from that was that actually the differences between girls and boys and how their brains work are actually less than the differences among boys or among girls. And that's sort of the big social science story, as Michael Thompson said yesterday. So there are indeed huge disparities right now. There are problems that boys face that girls don't in school, but we shouldn't forget that there's a whole range of ways to be a boy or to be a girl.
Yeah, there was interesting studies on, it's called stereotype threat, and they gave a test to African Americans, and they kind of hinted that this is a test that white people do better at, and they did much worse on this test than if they had been not told that. And they did a test at MIT and to white students, and they said that, oh yeah, you know, it was a group of Asian students who did really, really well on this test. And those white students did worse than another group did on the exact same test. And this happens with boys and girls. So boys get the message, and it's subtle, but it's pervasive, that school is for girls. You know, boys are the ones getting in trouble. Boys, and you know, there's some boys at the very top, but there's a lot of boys who are the ones getting in trouble. And so we have to do something about that.
And
message.
actually, in our studies, the Families and Work Institute, the organization that I had, does ongoing nationally representative studies of the U.S. workforce. And lately, I've been worrying a lot more about men than I have been worrying about women. There are a lot of things to worry about women, don't get me wrong. But men's health has declined. Men are now facing more conflict than, tension in managing their work and family life than women are for a whole variety of reasons that I could talk about. Men's college graduation rates, et cetera, have gone down. So I think that, with Mind in the Making, with the work that I did on life skills, what I found is that, just as you're saying, society reflects what we think gender roles should be. And sometimes those are really not helpful. A lot of times they're not helpful. I think it's important for us to try to not stereotype. Girls can be this, boys can be that. And I didn't really differentiate in the research about teaching life skills to boys and girls because I think that it's something that both boys and girls can equally benefit from. And it's a matter of knowing your unique child, not just the gender of your child.
Right, with the gender and as Larry said, the context.
Mm-hmm. But what did the professor do?
Do you want to? I'm sorry. Do you want to talk about the response to the email that it was sent to your?
Well, I mean, the professor is sitting right here, and he's married to me. So I won't put him on the spot, but let's suffice to say he was not amused. That said, I think our role, and I'm not a professor. I work with the residential side of student life. But I think our role as educators is to redirect students and help them find engagement, help them find meaning, help them learn from these experiences, and not just sort of mock them. I mean, I know it's a funny story, but actually it had a good ending because there was a conversation. And we've had all kinds of conversations like that, and modeling, this is how you talk to someone and who's, we live in a hierarchy. Here's how you send an email to a professor. And those things, I mean, it is, it's the parentist stuff. It's easy to laugh at and mock the parents and mock the student and all that, but there's a learning opportunity as well.
Right there in the back.
I'm Dan Sharp with the Eisenhower Foundation. If the subject were what are the goals of grandparenting, how different would your comments have been?
How different. Can I just jump in? I have a cousin who's a family therapist, and she always said that grandparents and grandchildren have a special bond because they're allied against a common enemy. And sometimes I really think my goal as a parent is to become a grandparent. So yeah, I think there's a total double standard. You're a grandparent.
I think it's a double standard. Just from you cannot believe how much stricter my own parents were than me. I mean, it's because my husband is Western. I mean, I was raised in the United States. My parents were really traditional, and exactly this. When they come now, they just buy my kids ice cream, all these presents. They don't know why they have to work all the time. So one data point.
Exactly, it's the corrected experience, so you can make up for, and I think that's great.
Well, and part of what I found in writing the book, The 6 Stages of Parenthood, is that in part we define our values, our goals of parenting in reaction to what our own parents did, but also in what they did do. I think, and I'll speak about my own grandson, Antonio. He's my step-grandson. He just graduated from high school. And the relationship that I could have with him was very different than my son or daughter-in-law could have, which is he knew that my job in life was to help him think through how to live more intentionally. And I would always say, that's my job. My job is, and so when he was playing video games to the total distraction and horror of his mother. And we talked a lot about that, and I said, well, if you're going to love video games, I want you to start creating them. Let's do something creative about it. But he got then into martial arts, which helped him learn to focus and took him away from video games. And so my job was, he can be real honest with me in a way that if he's having a fight with his mother, he can't necessarily be. And I don't tell, except for to all of you.
Well, that's the other thing is that we didn't touch on here, is that as much as we're talking about the goal of parenting, it's so important for kids to have another trusted adult that they can go to, because there's so much involved in the intensity of the parental relationship.
Especially when they're teenagers. And I think of it as somebody who the parents trust, that you're going to be responsible in this, and somebody that the child trusts that you're not going to go running to my mom with everything.
That was one of the biggest predictors we learned yesterday in the panel on boys. One of the biggest predictors of success for boys in school is having what Thompson, I think, said, called a charismatic adult in their lives, and not a parent, but another figure.
We have time for one more? Yes. Okay. Right over here.
Thank you for a great panel. My question is, in order to reduce the fear of parenting and parentism that you talked about, how can our culture make steps towards being more parent-friendly? Thank you.
Well, I think that we individually value being a parent. Parenthood, mother pie; motherhood, mother pie. Apple pie; fatherhood, apple pie. And we've seen parents become more, in our national studies, we've seen parents become more focused on that being important. If you look at work, and the other aspects of their life, increasingly people have become more family-centered, which I think is actually positive. I think that we really need to value caring. We don't value caring other than in our personal lives, but as a society, we don't value the jobs that are caring jobs, nursing, teaching, those sorts of jobs as much, and we don't really value being a parent. I think that's a huge societal push that we all need to make so that we value being a parent a whole lot more.
I think a small practical thing we can start with, this is a big global view, a small practical thing is when we see a parent struggling, like the toddler's having a tantrum in line at the bank, that we not give a dirty look, that we actually smile, that we actually say, can I hold your groceries? Or boy, looks like you're having a tough day. Because we're so primed. We hate when people give us dirty looks, or worse, but we all do that.
One thing it was so fun being on a panel, like this and the one yesterday, because it's the first one in a long time where the conversation has been sort of elevated for just this reason. But I would say that in the whole uproar, firestorm that I've been in, I learned a couple of things. One is that I thought it was a shame that so much of the parenting debate, again, not like the one we're having now, but just kind of mainstream, is everything is boiled down to something Ellen said, just false dichotomies. So the debate is, wait, do you want your child to be creative or do you want them to work hard? And if you put it like that, okay, I'm going to go with creative. Or do you want your kids, do you want happiness for your children or success, black or white? Then of course we all pick, well, I think we pick, I don't know, but I would pick happiness. Right? But it's just so much more complex life, the relationships between these things are, of course we want both creativity and hard work, right? So that's one. And the other thing I was thinking is, my previous books are actually foreign policy ones, and the book I wrote before this was about how hyperpowers rise to power and why they fall. And the thesis was that it's actually not military, aggression or whatever, but it's actually what I call tolerance. That is the ability to learn from lots of different people's ideas. And it's those societies that can pull in the best from all different cultures. And one of the reasons America's always been very strong is when it comes to science or business or food or cooking, we're actually unusually good at drawing in we're very tolerant. But then I wrote in this op-ed, not so when it comes to parenting. I think we are even the most tolerant of us who love multicultural dancing and food when it comes, when it comes to yoga, but when it comes to like a different culture, different way you see it, it looks different, instant judgment.
It's threatening though. I mean, if someone else does it differently, what it's really saying is maybe we're not right. I always, my advice to parents was find a Jeannie or find a Nancy. Find someone in your life who's not going to say, oh, my kid is better than yours, or you did it wrong. And there were plenty of those in my life, even a long time ago, when my kids were little. But you've got to find those people who make you laugh and appreciate how hard it is, and that you're learning from your mistakes and trying to do it better.
Right. Well, I want to thank all of the panelists here for this interesting discussion, and thank all of you for coming.